I'm here with Joe McDonald, who has returned from fighting in Ukraine for about 7 months. Much of that time he spent being shelled. What's it like to be shelled by the Russians?
So, Joe McDonald on being shelled. Well, as I mentioned before in the previous video, the war started off very explosively for us. We were there 3 days and something like 36 to 42 caliber missiles got fired at us. We didn't actually know they were caliber missiles at the time. You know, people were saying things like it was planes dropping bombs, or it was dark. Big thing go boom. We run into forest. More things go boom. We hide. Things go boom more. We hide more. Then things stop go boom. We look around and make tea. That was the first experience. But it turned out from the news and stuff that it was caliber missiles later on. And that was my first time under fire. And it was very heavy fire. Something like 21 tons of bombs or something altogether, someone told me. So that was, obviously it's bad that they attacked us and that people died, but I actually found that a pretty good experience. I got, not officially, but personally commended by a couple of my NCOs and officers, because I'd just been trying to look after people and keep guys warm and make guys tea and just stop people from freaking the fuck out. After that, then we went to Rivne, and there was a lot of raids where nothing went bang there, but there were a couple of explosions that happened in that time. There was the drone strike. Fortunately, that didn't come near us, and there were some other things in the Rivne area that got either hit by rockets or long-range rockets or missiles or bombs from plane in that time. But again, that was, it wasn't that bad. It wouldn't really affect us. And then we got to Kharkiv for a week or two. And a hospital near us got hit by some Smersh rockets, which is a very big 300mm wide rocket.
So that's about 12 inches.
Yeah, big fat bastard. And they were landing within a kilometre or two. And there was enough of them that the sort of concussions were rocking the concrete ground that we were on 1,000 yards away, and that was, again, it's happening, but it's not happening to you, and it all feels a bit distant, and there's kind of bugger all you can do about that kind of, when it's that big. It's, try and get a bit of cover around you so shrapnel doesn't hit you and stuff, but if it lands anywhere near you, you're dead. There's nothing you can do about anything that big, so you just sort of sit there and try and stop any bits of rubble or shrapnel hitting you if it happens to come close, and get behind something, basically, get in a hole or around with 3 corners of a room around you or something, and try and protect yourself that way. But then we actually got out to the front and things started to turn up a notch, because as soon as we got to the front, mortars of various sorts start to become a multiple times a day, or sometimes just all fucking day occurrence. You've got 3 basic types they chuck at you.
Right.
There's the 81 or 82.
Okay, so that's what
that's the basic Russian mortar,
yes.
And then they've got a heavy mortar.
Yeah.
Which is 120mm, and the difference between shell sizes, like Russia at the 82 is about that much, about that wide and about that much longer than that.
Yep.
And the 120 is like this massive torso size, huge bloody shell. So when one of them goes bangs near you, you really know it. And then there's the is it TC or TB9, which is an auto mortar. They call it a gun-mortar. It looks like a little bit of artillery. I hate those bloody things, because they'll have a team of, say, 4 or 5 of them, and they'll have a few magazines each, and they'll move them around with vehicles to different spots, and then suddenly you'll hear this like boop, 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 and you get up and you cock your ear, and then you hear the or the noise they make when they're coming in more horizontally.
Right.
And then you know that it's not just one mortar or a few mortars about to hit you. There's about 20 mortars that are going to go off in your area. And of course, all of these mortars come in two basic flavours, which is high explosive and airburst. And both are fragmentation type rounds. So the airburst ones are kind of, in a way the worst. They're the more dangerous because they go off and there's a great cone of shrapnel comes down out the sky.
Right, so just being in a trench in the ground won't save you. You've got to have some overhead cover.
Yeah, I mean, if it hits you dead on, it won't save you. But so yeah, having some top cover. But you can also do what's known as turtling, because if you basically get your helmet and you pull really hard, you can get 80-90% of your body inside the helmet.
Oh, right.
Basically, we call it turtling. So that's what you tend to do. And I've heard that screaming a bit, just ah, that helps when you're being shelled multiple times a lot. Then that's the light end of it, And mortars do most of the killing, But that's the light end of it. Then there's the artillery. 122 and 152 are the two most common Soviet types. There's also the 203mm naval gun mounted on a carrier that's called a pion. That's frightening. There's a very, very big bang. I'm not sure how much the shells weigh, but we're getting on for more than 100 kilograms of explosives going.
So when that lands in the ground, you get a crater size? It completely destroyed a large concrete. 2 rounds completely destroyed a concrete paper factory in Kharkiv. Right.
It's a very large amount of damage is caused by one of them.
Right, and if it lands just in the middle of a field, you get a crater.
I've never actually seen one land. They tend to shoot at more important targets than that. With that, so I never actually saw just a big hole in the ground. But I did see there are some photos I've got of a building in Kharkiv that was hit, and I'll sure that you'll show them now.
Okay.
That's the kind of damage they do. And then there's the 152s. I think I only had one of them fired at me when we were in a town close to the Donetsk River. I had one fired at us then, and that just destroyed a house and made a really big hole. And the amount of shrapnel in the surrounding fences, it was just it's like a million shotguns have been fired at all the kind of fences and stuff around. So much shrapnel comes off one of them.
So just imagine you're in a trench and some shells are landing. How close do they have to be to really worry you?
Well, when you start to hear or that kind of noise, or in the case of rockets, when you start to hear things like that, you kind of know it's in your general area. If the bangs are happening within let's say 150, 200 meters, this is bad. Like 400 meters, you're probably going to have taken cover if a bang happens within 400-500 meters. At 200 meters, you're actually starting to become in realistic danger of shrapnel. At 100 meters, more so. At 50 meters or 70 meters, bits of twig and stuff from the trees above you are just getting knocked off by the blast and falling down, and maybe little bits of earth and shrapnel and stones are kind of generally pitter-pat raining around the area. If it gets any closer than that, the ground starts to shake. I mean, if it's at that distance and it's a 122, the ground will be shaking. If it's an 82, it probably won't. If it's an 82mm mortar, probably won't. If it's 122 artillery, the ground will be shaking. They're basically, when the windows start to go, and like almost crack, that's when you start to take cover. When it gets closer, when the windows start to break, you're moving, When bits of trees that are in your vicinity are suddenly getting like blown off by blast, and bits of shrapnel and big branches and stuff are falling down, then it's really bad. If it's on the lip of your trench or within a meter or two, you feel like you've just been smacked in the face by the general compression and blast of the air in
So that's happened to you?
Yeah.
A mortar round has landed within a yard of your trench?
About 4 or 5, a few times.
Right.
A few times, Yeah, I don't know what size it was though. They didn't, you know. They all sound bangs sound about the same when it's actually happening too, unless it's anything like really really vast. You know, it's quite hard to tell. Like they also had we had some decent Russian soldiers across from us. Decent, you know, like Marines, basically some kind of Russian Marines, and they were pretty. They were the guys using the auto mortars, and they were switched on. But then the Donetsk People's Republic were also across from us, and they had I think they'd just been given some military museum stuff. You know, like here's a field gun and a truck full of ammo. Have fun. You know, so they'd try and they were trying to hit this old. We were using as a communications hub to boost our signals so we could talk to all our different positions. They were trying to hit that for months. They did actually hit it near the end, but this is a sort of double tennis pitch size building. It's probably had 1,000 rounds fired at it by now, and they hit it once. It gives you some idea. And this is something the Russians built, and it's got a big radio mast on top of it. Like, as targets go, pretty easy to hit. Like, they've got it on their own maps. So they know exactly where it is. They built it. You know, it's a military installation. So, yeah. So, they still only managed to hit that with, was it? Yeah, it was mortars. I think they actually hit it with mortars in the end. And then there's the other thing, which is the thing I hate the most of all, which is rockets, which come in two varieties. One is great big explosion, just one, and the other is cluster bomb, and that's the one I really don't like. I'm not sure of the Grad, which is the smaller rocket system, modern Katushka, and the Smersh, which is bigger. They both have cluster bomb variants, and I think the Grad drops like 260 bomblets, and the Smersh drops like 380 or something like that.
Which are against the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, they're against the Geneva Convention. Then again, the Yanks were using them in the Gulf War, so I don't know. You know, I've never done I've only had 1 or 2 classroom lessons on the Geneva Convention. Pretty much don't shoot prisoners, as is all the infantry, and don't torture anyone, is all the infantry needs to know. You know, we don't need to know about which weapons are illegal and not illegal, because they'll give us the weapons they give us. You know.
Anyway, so a cluster bomb has landed,
and cluster bombs landed, and then it's just raining hand grenades for a bit, and we call it the Devil's Pop Rocks because it sounds in a very dramatic, amplified way like pop rock candy.
Right.
And it's just like, crackle pop pop around you, and it can last anywhere between sort of 7 or 8 or 20 seconds. It's a really long 20 seconds. It's a really, really long 20 seconds when there's hand grenades just raining down out the sky around you. And you just it's always afterwards when it stops and you're like, you really check yourself, like, have I been hit? And I don't know, because my adrenaline's through the roof right now. I am on edge. So they're the least favourite things. But like, over the amount, how many times have I had something go bang within 500 metres of me? Hundreds. How many times have I had something go bang within? Because again, you can't always tell, because explosions don't give this big, as I said previously, they don't give this big grand cinematic visual signature, or if it's in the daytime and there's no, because there is a flash, but you need low light conditions to see it. So really, something might go bang, and you've got next to no idea of how, was it within 100 metres or 200 metres or 300 metres? Because you'd think you'd be able to tell after a while, but different atmospheric conditions, like how much humidity is in the moisture and in the air, and how is it night or day? Is it a high pressure day or a low pressure day? This actually changes what explosions sound like quite a bit. So that can make it harder to judge where things are landing exactly. And also, there's getting used to outgoing, and there's a lot of, we've got our own local mortar teams and artillery, but then there's also the more important artillery is coming in and out the area, and they have no requirement to tell us. In fact, that's the rules. We're not meant to know where the HIMARS and the M777s are, for obvious reasons. You know, they're very, very important assets. So they are the real special forces of the Ukrainian war. You know, they're the people who do the most killing and have the most, you know, freedom to go wherever they want, do what they need to do, and pull out again.
Right.
And remember that there was an Amnesty International report about how the Ukrainians were using artillery systems in towns, and you know, it's obviously it's very. I didn't agree with anything that report said. I think if you're fighting to retake towns that have been captured, it's really very difficult to not fight around a civilian populace. But if you are not familiar with artillery, like as familiar as I am, or more so, and I would say I'm familiar at a pretty amateur level, a 120 mortar going off a kilometre away on a low pressure day sounds like it's in the next damn room. A Grad firing off all its rockets a mile away sounds like it's next to you. An M777 howitzer going off 2 kilometres a day makes the bloody windows shake, you know? So, yeah, I think these Amnesty people, they're firing artillery right in the towns. It could have been a few miles out of the town in the woods, for all they know. But the first time you hear a bang, it takes the human animal a very long time to adjust to bangs that loud, basically, and to understand where all of them come from.
But you're saying that you don't know where things are, but yet when you've been there for a while, you started to get a feel for things, and you get more confidence, and not always spill your coffee and run for cover when the things are landing half a mile away. It
got to a point where I was so used to being mortared and shelled, because you still have a bit of a... You can hear the shell from artillery coming in. So you still get a couple, 2-3 seconds with actual artillery as it's going, kind of a meets noise or a zzz noise. That's what artillery sounds like, zzz. And you hear that and you have time to get the cover. But mortars, it got to the point with mortars where I'd hear the or in the distance, and you're like, all the lads, my new recruits who've in my fire team, they'd be running for the bunker, which I told them to do. If you hear anything, till you get used to it, just go to the bunker, take cover. You know, there's no, whatever you do, don't stand like you see me standing around cocking my ear. I'm used to it. Just learn from me. Don't do as I do as I say, basically in this instance. So they all go to the bunker, and I'd just be sat there drinking coffee. But the first sort of time this happened, before I had a chance to give them this is what we do when we get mortared briefing, there was like, by the way, if anything happens, the bunker's there. They're all running for the bunker and down there, and I just heard them going, Big Mac, and I'm like, just sat in my chair, like, it's not for us, don't worry about it. But, you know, I'll say at the same time, I wasn't perfect. There were times when I'd hear something, I'd be like, shit, come on, lads, get them to the bunker, and then, you know, I'd be there cocking my ear and it'd land actually a good bit further away than I thought to. Or it'd land, you know, really, really close. And I was thinking, no, it's going to be all right. But I got pretty tuned into it. I got tuned into it to a point where I definitely seemed to the young guys like a veteran, you know, someone who is not flapped by mortars. And I suppose that does count because, as I said to you earlier, so many people couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle the thought that they were going to die of mortar fire or just have to be subjected to mortar fire before they even got to fire their rifle at a Russian.
But there were times when you thought that you were going to die.
Oh yes, lots of them, you know, lots of them. But then, you know, there's a good line of Band of Brothers where I think Spears says, to be an effective soldier in war, you have to accept that you're already dead. And I took that to heart. It's something I agree with. You can't... Sometimes your job as a soldier is to stay put and die. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. You know? It's not... The war is not about your individual story. You know? It's not about you charging bridges and taking positions and winning glory. It's about what the army needs and what the war as a whole needs. So if your job is to stand there in a trench watching across a river to make sure the Russians don't cross, which they almost certainly won't, and be subjected to getting shelled multiple times a day, every day, or sometimes for prolonged intervals, then that's what you have to do. And there's nothing that can train you for that. There's people who have got the stones or the mental resolve to handle it, and there's people who don't. And as I said earlier, there's having 10 years in whatever branch of the military you were in, and being a sergeant and all of that, none of that means that you won't completely crack when you get under fire. And it could be the first time or a few times in. For some reason, it didn't really bother me that much. I found not getting my mail more emotionally distressing than the fact that I regularly woke up at, like, because they like to shell you first thing, and they like to shell you at meal times and when everyone's getting up in the morning, because, you know, if everyone goes to the toilet in the morning, that means there's a good amount of guys wandering around out the hole. So it's a good time to lob a couple of shells over. So, you know, I've been like sleeping in buildings and like heard some boom and been like, oh fuck it, I've in a sleeping bag, I'm not getting out, I'm just going to lie here and see where these land, because sometimes you do, sometimes you just can't be arsed, you know, and suddenly there's a hole in the fucking roof because some airburst's just gone through the corrugated iron, and you're like, oh, right, okay, probably time to like get the helmet and get the you know, running out naked wearing your body armour and your helmet to get to the bunker. But yeah, for some reason I'm one of the ones that can handle it. Me and my friend from Norway, really good lad, I won't say his name, but he knows who he is. We've been shelled together dozens of times, but again, how close these rounds actually fell to us, because you can't see because trees and stuff, who knows. But we've been in a trench together when like the bits of earth and stuff are getting chucked into the trench, and bits of tree that have been severed off by shrapnel are you know, big bits of oak are like falling down around us, you know, bits of wood that could like crush a man, you know, are like landing around our trench, very nearly in our trench. And yeah, he was a completely solid guy, and he was like 21, zero military experience, solid as a rock. He got the more senior NCOs kept recommending him to be a squad leader, but he just didn't want to do it. And in all fairness, it is difficult for someone who's 21 who doesn't have really an actual rank or a hierarchy of rank to back him up to project authority. So yeah, he will make an excellent sergeant or even officer if he decides to stick with the military career. But yeah, sadly it didn't quite work for him. But he's one of the bravest young men I've ever met, and completely unflappable. We had a guy in the trench with us at the same time who was just falling to pieces. You know, we need to go, we need to run. It's like, where? I mean, they shell the base, they shell here, they shell at the top of the hill, they shell the road all the way back to our base. I mean, getting out of here doesn't mean we're any safer. What we're best to do is just hunker down and smoke a few cigarettes and hope we don't die, you know? I would also seriously advise anyone considering a military career, while fitness is important, if you're actually going to be fighting, smoking is very important.
Oh, right.
Yeah, smoking saves lives, or at least saves sanity, because it gives you something to do. You know, instead of lying there practicing your screaming, you can just light a cigarette and have a Hamlet moment.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. No, I, just as before you said that, I was hearing dum, dum, dum. Yeah, I was hearing that.
Yeah. So that's definitely something people should take up, or at least have a cigar or something in your. I had a Cuban cigar in my first aid kit. So
right.
So if I found myself missing a leg and stuff, it was
World War II British Army first aid kit had a packet of cigarettes in it.
Quite right.
And the Americans had a packet of chewing gum.
Yeah.
And so you think the British got that right?
Yeah, they got that right. Yeah, there's
Okay.
not a couple of smokes if this is it, or you think this is about to be it, is the best way to deal with things. Basically, you know, you can worry about cancer once you've once you've survived the war at the end of the day.
Fair enough. So what's it like to be nuked?
Oh, well, yes. I did mention this to you. So as we've been in this, to give sort of some framework to it, we got deployed to Kharkiv, as I said. We're moved to an area adjacent to this big river, in which the Russians are on the other side, and we're screening, we're trying to observe the Russians, pass on their where they are, pass on their details, pass on their coordinates to the artillery and stuff. And then, you know, it was kind of boring. You know, the war had become quite stale and stagnated, and two armies, you know, like the First World War or the Second World War, when it had got a bit stuck with drones, basically. And that's what it was. And then suddenly, out the blue, the Kharkiv counter-offensive is happening, and we're all, oh, okay, suddenly, right, this lovely house, I got my house really nice, I had a hot shower and everything that we jerry-rigged together. I was really upset to leave that. And then lovely bunkers I built as well.
Oh, beautiful, yeah.
So suddenly we're off to this staging area, and we are poised and ready to go on the Kharkiv offensive, and it's already begun. You know, the forward elements are already engaging the Russians about 20k or so ahead of us, and we can hear it. So we're ready to go. QRF, moment's notice, you know, quick reaction force, moment's notice.
Right, yep.
And I'm on stag at like 12:30 at night in this forest. And, you know, this is the furthest I've been away from the Russians in bloody ages. So by my standards, it's like completely safe stag. So I was like, you know, I don't actually think anyone else from the other platoons is on stag at the moment. I think everyone's just sort of fucked it off. Because, well, there's a whole bloody army in between us and the Russians right now.
If there's a chance to sleep, take it.
So, yeah, so I was like, well, I'm just going to, you know, have a couple of cigarettes on my guard duty and, you know, not take it too seriously. You know, my main job is to stop other soldiers stealing our stuff in the middle of the night at this point, you know, not to worry about special forces. And then suddenly, all the trees in the forest around me, all the trunks of the trees from top to bottom just went blue. Like the world's biggest police light had just flashed off. A gigantic, huge, industrial-grade strobe light had just flashed off. And I was immediately thinking, what the fuck was that? Because it wasn't a caliber missile or a 2S7 pion round. And they're the two biggest things, or a Smersh. And they're some seriously big munitions. And I've had them all fired at me by now. So I know, at night and day. So I know what they sound like. And I know what they create. And they create a great big orange flash. They don't create a great big blue flash. And then about 15 seconds after that, after the initial flash, there was just the biggest crack I've ever heard. At which point my mate, who was in the trench at my feet, woke up and he was like, what the fuck was that? I just got 2 cigarettes out of the pack, lit both of them, passed it one. I was like, it was a big blue flash, and then there was a really big explosion 15 seconds later. And as I said that, the trees started to like blow in the wind, which was a coincidence, I think. And I was like, I think we've been nuked, mate. And he's like, fuck, really? I was like, yeah, really. And I just sort of kicked my feet out from under me and plonked down on the trench and had a cigarette and tried to think about sex, you know? And that's and then it turned out that we hadn't been nuked, but they had basically, from what I was told by Ukrainian officers, they had hit this geothermal power station that also had some kind of gas thing going on there with an Iskander intercontinental ballistic missile. So that was that was a moment. But you know, it's in a way it's quite good to know how you react to what appears to be imminent, hopeless annihilation. And it was to sit down, have a cigarette, and think about the best shag I've ever had. You know, which is a proper soldierly way to deal with your death, in my opinion. So at least on a moral ground, I'm quite proud of myself there. So yeah, so that was the biggest bang I've heard. But that must have been 10 or 15 kilometres away at the time. So even if it was a battlefield nuke, it wouldn't necessarily have killed us all. you know. And some of them are really quite small, like sort of 5 to 7 kilometres square kind of things, you know. Well, not square, round, radius. You know. But yeah, so I think that's about it. I haven't actually had a tank shoot at me.
Right.
I've had BMPs, BTRs fire like 30 mil in our general direction of forest. That was pretty horrible, what with all the trees exploding. But again, didn't actually, you know, hit any of us, you know what I mean? And we had a thing called a Fagot.
Right.
Which is a tripod mounted, very large, very wide anti-tank kind of rocket thing, fired at ROP once, because some bloody Ukrainian special forces had decided to start provoking the Russians by firing AKs at them in an attempt for them to give away their positions, which they did. But they gave away their positions by firing a tremendous amount at my position, which I wasn't very happy about. So yeah, that was a pretty big crack. It hit an oak tree that was like that wide, about 50 metres behind the position, and just knocked it down. It's a great big tree, so the tree's sort of coming down in our general direction and stuff. So that was all very dramatic. But again, no casualties, you know. Body armour's all very well and good, but if you want to survive a war, learn to love to dig. And dig a good trench and dig it deep. Make it comfortable so you don't mind being in there, you know?
Right. And get in the habit of digging in even if you don't think you're going to be attacked. I
mean, at least a shell, everywhere you go, you should dig a shell scrape. I mean, all you need is 6, how wide is your head? That wide. So if you can dig something that deep and then pile up the earth around the edge and pat it down, that's enough. It's enough to deal with at least bits of shrapnel and stuff that are winging around, you know. The deeper you get, the better you are, because it protects you more from blast and things like that. But yeah, that's the basic you should do. But if you're going to be anywhere for any length of time, you want to have a nice comfy trench to sit in and only have your, you know, ideally have that much above the top of the trench, and that's it, you know.
But all this said, you do have bits of shrapnel in you.
I do have a little bit of. I had some from the Yaraviv attack. I got some secondaries in my knee, and yeah, Kharkiv. No, not Kharkiv. When we were in what was it called?
I'm afraid I can't help you.
Oh yeah, there's one of the villages we're in. There was an airburst, and I got like a little finger. About half as wide as a finger, about the size of my little finger, about half as wide. Right. And that just stuck in my calf there. But it had lost most of its power. So it was a bit like, sounds very dramatic, you know, I was hit by shrapnel, but effectively you could sort of stab me with a short pair of scissors and it would have done about the same amount of damage, you know. It stung, and it got a bit infected afterwards. Right. And that was it, you know. But yeah, it's a lottery. Right. The last 2 friends of mine who were killed, one had no military experience, and he'd come into the war, learnt what he learnt, and did his best to be a good soldier, and he was a good soldier. And the other guy who got killed was ex-US Marines, MARSOC actually, which is like the Special Forces Reconnaissance, and he'd done tours of Iraq, Afghanistan. He was actually one of the guys who, without permission, crossed the river to the Russian side, carried out a drone reconnaissance mission, and came back to prove it could be done, because everyone was getting very fed up with the stagnation at that point. And then started kind of running the recce section of the Legion, although there were some competing elements. But yeah, anyway. But he was at one of my point is, 2 guys, the last 2 guys I know who were my friends who'd been killed were, one was a complete amateur, the other was pretty much special forces, a very well trained soldier, and both were killed by the same shell, and they were both in a trench, and the shrapnel just chose to take the angle that arrived at them that day, and that's all there is to it, you know. And you can have a good trench and you can have a good body armour, but if it just goes and hits you in the neck there, then there's nothing you can do. And no amount of training in the world makes you bulletproof or makes you shrapnel proof, you know. So yeah, I've been very lucky. I've been extremely lucky, you know. I've had bullets from machine guns that were fired when we had the Fagot fire, and they were firing machine guns of various sorts across at us then. I've had bullets whistle over my head and hit trees by me and stuff like that. But, you know, so if I chose to be stood up at that moment, it would have got me, you know. And I've seen bullets land, you know, in spots where I used to like that was a log where I used to like to sit and have a cigarette when I wasn't actually on watch, and I came back to it, and one of my mates is like, yeah, don't sit on that log anymore, Joe, and you see that it's like absolutely chewed up by some stuff that's been hit it, and it's like, yeah, you know, that's maybe not as safe as I thought it was, you know. Lightning doesn't strike twice, but sadly bullets do.
And how's your hearing?
Oh, my hearing's buggered. I wouldn't say I'm deaf, but I'd say I've probably lost about 40% of my hearing. Shooting I think, you know, some people can get deafened by shooting a 2.2, so I hear. I didn't really find that shooting my unsilenced M4 without earplugs was much of a problem. Firing the machine gun, that's really, really, really noisy. Like, really noisy, you know? Like, I remember the scene in Black Hawk Down where the guy who plays Spud in Train Spotting, as they've kind of been left, and he's firing his machine gun, and his mate's like, they're over there. He's like, what? What? And that's how I felt after firing the machine gun. And then we were hanging out with an artillery unit and supporting them. But being the force protection, because self-propelled artillery moved, it was constantly moving around to different places and providing close fire support for the troops who were really, really on the front line in the counter-offensive. And I am definitely a lot deafer than I used to be. But on the other hand, my mum's shouting is less annoying. So visiting the family
swings and
was
roundabouts.
More pleasant, you know. So that's okay, you know. Hearing isn't all it's cracked up to be, you know.
Right. Okay. Well, so now we know what it's like to be shelled.
Yes.
Thanks for telling us.
You're welcome, Lloyd.
You may be curious to understand better why Ukrainians are not at all keen to be absorbed into the Russian Empire. Well, it's because of history. In World War II, when the invading Nazis conquered the Ukraine, many Ukrainians actually welcomed them with open arms, thinking, oh my goodness, this isn't us being conquered by the Nazis. No, this is our liberation from the ghastly Soviets. And it could have been that the Ukrainians would have fought for the Germans against the Russians, and you can say that it was a massive blunder by the Germans, who regarded the Ukrainians as Slavs and Untermensch and not to be part of the Third Reich, and that they didn't grasp that opportunity. They could have had a whole Ukrainian army fighting against the Russians, and don't forget that the Germans in World War II very nearly beat the Russians, but instead they treated the Ukrainians extremely badly, lost all their support. There were loads of partisans fighting behind the lines, and the Germans had not only lost a potential army to fight the Russians with, but they had to use an awful lot of their army fighting all these partisan actions behind the lines. It was all extremely unpleasant. But the reason that the Ukrainians thought that perhaps this was their opportunity to break free of the ghastly Soviets was that life under the Soviets was really bad. And if you want to understand more about that, then you could do a lot worse than listen to the audiobook Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine. You see, in the 1930s, we don't know exactly how many, but somewhere between 3 and 5 million, something like that, Ukrainians were starved to death, near certainly deliberately, by Stalin's regime. He was using famine as a weapon against the Ukrainians to stifle the Ukrainian independence movement. You can't really have an independence movement if you've got nothing to feed it with. Meanwhile, he was using Ukraine as a breadbasket to feed Moscow and keep him popular with the people there. Now, you could listen to the audio book absolutely free by going to my sponsor's website. My sponsor is Audible. It's a gigantic website with just loads and loads of audio content. It's almost all spoken word. It's not just audio books though. There are radio series, comedy series, there are podcasts and the like. And if you are a member of Audible, you get access to the Audible Plus catalogue for free, unlimited, and that has an awful lot of Audible originals, things that they themselves have commissioned, as well as the Audible audio books for which they are better known. And if you go to audible.com/Lindybeige, you will find there details of a free introductory offer. You can get one free audio book, which is yours to keep forever. It's yours. You download it and there's a little player gadget, and then you can listen to it at your leisure on all manner of devices in all sorts of strange positions and strange places, because, well, I shan't intrude. Anyway, and one of those is Red Famine, and it's 17 hours of information about just how terrible things were under Stalin in Ukraine, and that's still within living memory. So perhaps it's not that surprising that an awful lot of modern Ukrainians don't really want to join Russia again.
Hi, if you'd like to help Ukraine by either donating to my friends in the International Legion who are at the front right now, very cold and miserable. There are links in the description. If you would rather donate to something a bit more peaceful, there's another link in the description to a new organisation run by Ryan Hendrickson, who has a YouTube channel called Tip of the Spear, and he is out actively dealing with landmines in Ukraine right now. So in either case, you will be saving lives if you donate. So please do. Thanks.
Lindybeige!